Hello and welcome to another episode of Alan Writes. We're working on The Winter of Truth. It's a Star Wars fanfic bit. I could morph it into its own sci-fi genre, but we'll deal with that when the time comes. After all, unless I work for Disney, I'm not getting this out there unpublished. But anyway, it's a thriller, and we've not had things blow up yet, or a lot of tension. I mean, we've seen battles, but from a distance. Now that's a question of what do we want to include something like that? If this was, damn it, if this was a an actual Star Wars space opera, there would have to be a lot of blam blam pow pow of some sort to keep things interesting. Right now, because she's an engineer and she's worked on AT-ATs, she's here on Hoth to take a survey of the downed AT-ATs to figure out how the weak points can be ameliorated in some way. First of all, what they were and whether they can be ameliorated. But first, she's been pretty much deprived of all of her resources because that's the way the garrison works on a backwater, frigid world called Hoth, where people are fighting just to stay warm, let alone deal with any rebels who happen to attack the various outposts, which they have done. So there'll be some back and forth. I'm basing some of this on the old series lore, where there were multiple battles on Hoth. The rebels kept. I'm not sure of the exact thing, but except that some of the landscapes that I saw in some of the games were pretty intense in terms of battlefield carnage, and I want her to get out there and view some of it, and also indicate that the rebels exist on Hoth. Whether they're stay-behinds or their returns is a good question, because the Empire doesn't have enough to garrison every planet in totality. What they have on Hoth is basically a prefab base that they've thrown on the surface and decided that that's good enough because they're going to throw it close enough to the rebel base that the rebels can't come back and use it, or salvage things they've left behind, or use it to get off planet. The garrison would probably have TIE fighters, but whatever. It's not important. Um, I will have to remember that though, except that they don't fly very well in the atmospheric cold. Of course, they can fly in space. I mean, they're TIE fighters, but when you're dealing with atmosphere that's that cold, it can do things to plane. That's the same reason planes can fly perfectly fine in the Arctic if it's dry conditions. Um, Not an issue. But if you get ice on the wings, well, that's a different story. As you enter the battle jack in the corner, there was a lot of it. The first thing she did was the survey. What was intact and what was scrap? Fortunately, it looked like there was a lot of the former. A lot of the former. Or, at least in some portions. Fuel cells that were intact but just needed a capacitor refit. Injectors were plugged only on one end. Plenty of intact casings, even if the wiring was all shot inside. Even that she could repurpose once she tested leads. The rebels had clearly been in a rush. Clearly not been in a rush to leave. No doubt when Admiral Ozzel came out of light speed on top of them. Sadly, his part of the plan. Sadly, his part of the plan. Sadly, his part of the plan had. Sadly, though his part of the had worked to perfection, man had suffered a fatal heart attack in his moment of triumph. Obviously, this is a bit of the. This is called the Winter of Truth for a reason, because this is where propaganda in the Empire is where the truth goes to die. We know what happened to Ozzel. We know that Vader choked him to death. But for the press purposes, there'll be the fatal heart attack and his moment of triumph, etc., etc. A glorious death for the Imperial cause. A man working to the very end. That he kept himself together till that then was a what did he call it? Was a brain. Where's my brain? It's gone away today. Was a guidance, and I know that's the wrong word. But moving on to them all. We'll come back to it. That's again what the second draft is for. When you're like, I don't know a word, put something else in and move on. You know the story. Get the story down. If you don't get the story down, you can't fix it. So, here we go. They have been rushed to leave. She labored. Their computers. Careful to her data pad locked until she could fully wipe the fragmented memory slates. The rebels did like to slice systems up, and while she didn't think they'd leave anything like that behind in this sort of junk, she didn't want to be she didn't want to be wrong. And that's part of her personality trait. She doesn't really want to be wrong. She wants to be an engineer. She wants to have everything locked up and tight. By the time the troopers, the DT troopers, returned, she had set up the structure of two things. First, an analysis bench. And analysis bench, because otherwise, which was a point. The second was a hoist for physical inspection. Assist with physical inspection. Third was the light was proper lighting. Both of the above. And lastly, she had figured out how to fix a battered speeder. How to fix a battered speeder, or at least get the engine started, or at least, or hopefully at least get the engine started. To power everything. You've been busy. Lawner noted as his troopers spread out. Half to rest, half to watch. Yeah, you? She asked. You could call it that. But the men say it's what we would call it. It's a nerf hunt. Say it's a nerf hunt. But the men say it's a nerf hunt. Rebels are long gone. And even if they did come, are long gone. And have taken everything worthwhile with them. Okay, he said, and then considered her what is it, the outline of the speeder she had figured out, or salvaged. Though now they might have something. Well, now they might have something. You should disable that. You should disable that before you go. It look like junk. It looked like junk again. Good idea, she replied. There was no point in attracting attention. Didn't want it. Good idea. Can I borrow a few of your men? Just a few minutes. That's fine, Honor said, and motions Sergeant Straits. It's over. A hand signal that somehow indicated for Straits to gather up 4 men. Lieutenant then reached into a pocket of his cold weather coat. The blaster he produced was an elegant thing. A sporting model that she didn't know. She doesn't know sports. Let's put it that way. A sporting model that she didn't know. Could be one of many. She didn't know. Its barrel was long, made for target shooting. barrel was long. Made for target shooting. Had to wonder if it could penetrate even a thick layer. All right. Trophy? She asked. Gift. He replied. You need something to protect yourself. Alright. Gonna take a break. And we're back. It's, there are many things I can do, while writing. I can ignore hunger and thirst, and even if I'm kind of sleepy, I can throw things up, but, some things wait for no man. Especially not me. Alright. You need to protect yourself. You need something to protect yourself. He offered it. Grip first. Grip first. The safety was on. Safety was on? Mm-hmm. She took it. She took it gingerly. Surprised by the lightness of the construction. Not a serious weapon. Do you think I really need this? Do you think I really need this? She asked. It's better than nothing. You see the rebels fire a few shots to make noise while you run. Run and find us. Then we'll deal with them. Then we'll deal with them. Honor promised. And I gotta go take another dump. Damn it! Well, that was less effective than I had wanted. Alright, so let's pick this up again. You see the rebels fire a few shots, make noise while you run and find us. Then we'll do. He sounded sincere. So she gave him a smile and pocketed the weapon. Natural. She'd need a holster. Actually, but naturally she'd need a holster. But those easy enough to make. In fact, the cargo straps could be repurposed for precisely. Neither of those words are spelled correctly. The troopers ambled over. Their heavy blaster rifles slung. She hadn't really noticed that before, but the barrels were larger and shorter. That technically makes it a carbine, doesn't it? Well, noticed how they wore them. They wore them. Barrel down instead of up. Less chance of something getting in the barrel. Dripped down rather than splashing up from mud. Their help, she put things into something of a disarray. The computer cores came with her, so she could reprogram them properly back at base, and also keep them out of the cold that they had data sheet to better preserve or same data. I'm going to say that the cold can affect systems, that it can wipe data or corrupt it. Last thing she had to do was continuously, it's not how you spell that, continuously reload the same programs over and over, just asking for a bit of corruption to creep in. Which is also a callback to her problem with corruption and the Empire and what she didn't want to see. It's the Winter of Truth. We're going to be revealing some things so that maybe she can have her springtime for what have you. Whether or not she maintains being a rebel or an Imperial girl, we'll wait and find out. What there? She had a plan. In a day or two, she could head out and survey the site, and finally survey the site. She could head out and finally survey. She'd have to see if. Then she'd have to see if. Finally, survey this site. The AT-ATs were waiting. Okay, this is chapter 4. And we're going to go right to the speeder's engine roared as Venara flew out of the hangar. And what's she going to do? Flew out of the hangar. Now, I could make it more difficult. I could put in a montage. Flew out of the hangar. And dipped down in the cold. Nearly scraping the ice till she got the repulsors back in line. How they got out of line to begin with was a question. Would have to wait. This was no test run. She'd already done that in the hangar several times. The whole thing really earned its title as a hangar queen. The whole thing really earned. There were half a dozen things wrong with it. Stabilizers, vents, a wiring glitch that completely screwed the targeting computer. That and more. Thankfully, it was a robust craft that, while intended for combat, could ferry her out without too much trouble. The repulsor is scrammed again, and she restarted them once more. Had to be some sort of wiring issue, since it came and went. Probably chafing somewhere she couldn't see. Digging in through the excessive insulation to let it ground out. Briefly. The charge ground out briefly. Carbon would seal things up. Time until the chafing wore that loose. I don't know if that's actually the case. I'll figure it out. Good enough engineering thing that's if you ever watch Star Trek, whenever they have a technical issue, they just literally put in a signature that says tech on it, and then they have somebody come up with one of their people comes up with a reason that the thing wouldn't work or would work, or the dilithium crystals are interacting badly with the space modulator, what have you. It's tech speak. You're not supposed to look in too much to it, other than there's a problem and people need to try to solve it, or at least work around it. So, when she looked up again, the battlefield lay before her. And let's make it pretty. It was a lane. It was a lane. Do they use kilometers? Oh God, what's the end of the message? It was a lane. Narrow and long. Just enough for space for 3 walkers to traverse along. Just enough space for 3 walkers to traverse, with enough space to support each other. To support each other. The trenches came first. Rebel built. They had almost melted back into the surface. Here and there were artillery towers, all blasted and ruined. All blasted and ruined. Beyond that was an Imperial lane. An Imperial lane. Yeah, long, just enough 3 walks to traverse without to support each other. And amid that lane were 4 AT-ATs. Or 4 let's see, we see 2 were killed. Were 2 AT-ATs. 2 AT-ATs. And half a dozen AT-STs. The smaller scout transports shattered to bits by blaster fire. Pieces of 2, not 1, but 2 AT-ATs and half a dozen AT-STs by blaster fire. Shattered to bits. She ignored those and made a circuit around the first walker. Armored transport, armored. What do they stand for again? Jeez, you'd think I would remember this. The first carcass. Yes, sir. She ignored those and made it on the first carcass. It had been blown to bits. It was almost intact. It was almost intact. Lying on its side. Very strange. A glance found nothing with it. No gaping, no gaping wounds. No, its legs still intact. The second carcass was more familiar. It had all the markings of heavy blaster fire. It had been blown up. Likely from within. Given the spray of the spread of the hull, the gray fragments littering the ice. Have submerged by the glittering ice. That was her first target. That was her first. That was her first. That was her first sight. Right. Given the internal nature of the, given the external nature of the damage. From fuel cells struck within. Given the outward. Given the familiar. Given the familiar nature of the damage, just the familiar nature. The AT-ATs were like any other vehicle. They had to have power, a lot of it, or they were just an elevated bunker. They were just an elevated bunker. That power demanded fuel cells, and even the best fuel cells could explode under the wrong circumstances. She sat down beside it, one hand hovering over the repulsor. Reset as she did so. Now was not the time for accidents. Alright, now I'm going to have to leave it there. She's going to get out. She's going to do damage analysis. I probably need to do some research specifically on crash sites, impact sites, military evaluations to understand where she goes from here. She's going to obviously have to gather a lot of the pieces of the hull and try to reconstruct what happened. But first she's going to have to inspect, scan, gather, and reconstruct. Seems good enough. Like I said, I'll have to do more research, but my research will inform my writing, and my writing has informed my research. This is what I need to look at. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Alan Writes, The Winter of Truth. We're going somewhere. It's getting interesting, I hope. Haven't had to have a man with a gun walk into the room, although I just did that, but essentially with Lawner. He has a blaster, and that's the Chekhov's gun equivalent of you have to, you show something and then they're going to use it later. But I've been doing a lot of that, and I hope it all fits together when the time comes. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and stay safe out there. Thanks.